You know, these non-Jewish white merchants were really prejudiced. It's almost as if they were willing to enslave people, too. That's so interesting. This is Historically Zoe. Okay, so we last left off with the Jews and the pirates finally getting to the island of Jamaica in 1655. But now it's time to look at how exactly the Jews thrived on the island and developed an economy that led them to essentially create Jamaica's mercantilist society. So let's dive in. By the time the English came to Jamaica in 1655, the island was barely settled. It only had 7 sugar farms, not yet plantations, producing negligible quantities of sugar every year. And the Spanish hadn't developed the island for a reason. Jamaica is rich in arable land, but not so rich in minerals and mines. And that's what the Spanish wanted. They wanted gold and silver, not farmland. So they left Jamaica alone for a long time. So Jews and pirates were essentially coming into nothing. But for Jews, that was okay, because the Jews of Jamaica were merchants, and Jamaica was situated on prime trade lanes in the Caribbean. Furthermore, they had essentially created a network of Jewish traders all over the world, and a phenomenon that Professor David Sorkin calls port Jews. Sorkin states, many of the conversos and crypto Jews who left the Iberian Peninsula and moved to the Mediterranean ports of Venice and Livorno and the Atlantic ports of Bordeaux, London, Amsterdam, and Hamburg, and the New World ports of Jamaica, Suriname, Recife, and New Amsterdam. The result was a Sephardi trade network which connected the old Mediterranean routes with the new Atlantic economy. In an age without a developed banking system, these merchants had the great advantage of being able to do business with and to draw bills of exchange on relatives, friends, or business associates whom they could trust. As Sorkin explains, following their transatlantic expedition, Jews were able to create this massive trade network that allowed them to get a jump start on the white merchants of Jamaica, giving them a foothold in the economy before others could even get started. Jews in Port Royal were successful merchants, and because of their successes, were able to petition for denization, which is like citizenship except not citizenship. It gives the person the right to property and the right to live somewhere and be a part of the society, but not the rights of a natural-born citizen, like the right to vote. Letters of denization were given to Jews often before they gained full citizenship, as evidenced in an entry in the Calendar of State Papers in 1668. July 3rd, entry 381, the King to Sir Thomas Moodiford, Governor of Jamaica. Whereas Solomon Gabe Faro and David Gomez Enriquez made free denizens of England and recommended to him on behalf of some considerable merchants who suppose it may be for the benefit of the colony, so long as they behave themselves, to remain upon the island and freely trade there. Countersigned by Secretary Sir William Morris. The process of denization was interesting. Petitions for denization were eventually submitted to the king, but had to go through a colonial legislator first, which would countersign the recommendation to the king, and then the king would then grant them denization. However, it wasn't always such an easy process, and they ran into a lot of trouble, especially with non-Jewish white merchants and anti-Semitic governors. In 1672, a petition by 31 non-Jewish white merchants of Jamaica was submitted to the Board of Trade asking for the Jews' expulsion from the island. And this continued to happen as well, as evidenced by a petition submitted in 1692 stating, Jews eat us and our children out of all trade. The Board of Trade does not want them at Port Royal, a place populous and strong without them. The Jews have made Port Royal their Goshen. Goshen is a biblical term. Don't worry about it. And will do nothing but trade. This is a great and growing evil, and had we not warning from other colonies, we should see our streets filled and the ships hither crowded with them. This means taking our children's bread and giving it to Jews. Yikes. The Board of Trade was a subset of the colonial legislature, the General Assembly of Jamaica. They had control over the trade and oversaw legal trade that white merchants conducted alongside Jewish merchants. And this was not the only form of anti-Semitism that the Jews faced. They faced really high taxes levied on them by the same General Assembly. The first set of taxes levied on the Jews came in 1698. The Declaration, entitled An Act for and Towards the Defense of this Island, proclaimed that Jews must pay £750 in addition to the taxes that they are already paying. These taxes were to be put towards sloops and constabularies. Sloops are ships and constabularies are like police departments. The Jamaican Assembly met 3 more times between 1699 and 1700 and levied a lot more taxes against the Jews. In sequence, they levied taxes of £1,000, £350, £473, and finally £5,250. By today's standards, that's well over $1 million in taxes just for the Jews of the island to raise, in addition to the taxes they already had to pay. Thankfully, that council was dissolved before Jews had to pay that last $1 million tax. But that wasn't the end of the anti-Semitism they faced by the colonial legislator or governors like Governor Beeston. He defended the policy and Jews continued to be taxed unfairly throughout the early 1700s. Of course, Jews fought back against these taxes. In 1701, they submitted a letter to Governor Beeston demanding that the taxes be abolished. Beeston continued to defend the taxation until his governorship ended in 1702. In 1721, the Jews appealed again. There's still high taxes nearly 20 years later. Presumably, it didn't end because in 1736, they sent another petition. In 1738, they went above the governor and to the king directly, demanding to King George II that the taxes be abolished. Finally, in 1739, Governor Edward Trelawney received direct correspondence from the king demanding that the taxes against Jews be dismissed. Despite a 40-year-long period of specialized taxes against them, Jews saw incredible economic growth and development. Foremost, they spread out across the island following an earthquake that destroyed Port Royal in 1692. In 1693, a synagogue was founded in Kingston and Jews began moving there en masse, presumably to be on the Bay of Kingston, better suited for trading. Jews also saw a growth in population. In 1700, there were 400 Jews on the island to 7,000 whites, but in 35 years, that number doubled, while the population of whites only grew by 600. In 1720, Jews made up 20% of the population of Kingston, and finally in 1831, they received full citizenship by order of the king. However, they had gained socio-economic rights in addition to these political rights long ago, and that was thanks in part to the pirates, who we'll look into next time. That's it for this episode of Historically Zoe. Again, my name is Zoe Katz. This video series is part of Agnes Scott College's History 440 Directed Research course and is under the advisement of Associate Professor of History Robin Morris. To learn more about this series, you can visit piratejews.zoekatz.agnescott.org or follow me on Twitter @HistoricallyZoe. Thanks so much and see you next time.